You probably think that winter in a medieval castle was like voluntary torture by bone-chilling cold.
Hollywood directors love to show us gloomy, dark halls where knights are desperately chattering their teeth. Everyone there is constantly huddling around a small fire, trying to warm their numb hands any way they can. Now is the perfect time to ruthlessly shatter your main stereotype about ancient methods of heating rooms. You probably genuinely believe that a huge roaring fireplace was the castle's main lifeline.
It may sound crazy, but fireplaces were arguably the least efficient way to heat a room.
A typical open fire against a wall sends about 80% of its energy straight up the chimney. Essentially, castle owners were simply heating the freezing street at their own enormous expense. That's why truly smart builders quickly realized the futility of this strategy and came up with alternative solutions. You are about to learn about the amazing solutions that modern scientists call true miracles of thermodynamics. Medieval architects didn't know complex physics formulas, but they had a brilliant understanding of the principles of air movement. They built massive structures that functioned as giant passive solar collectors. They designed room layouts to force warm air currents to move along strictly defined paths. Modern eco-friendly engineers are only now tentatively returning to these forgotten principles of passive heating. Yet our hardy ancestors used them every day simply to survive the winter. Get ready to be genuinely amazed at just how ingenious the human brain becomes under truly extreme conditions. When your health and the lives of your loved ones are at stake, you instantly become an engineer. This long story isn't just about laying bricks. It's about humanity's phenomenal adaptation to the environment. Forget the nonsense you were told in a boring voice at school about the dark and ignorant ages. The time has come to reveal the true, grand secrets of survival that have been right under our noses for centuries. Welcome to the stunning hidden world of forgotten architectural technologies of the past. Most modern people firmly believe in the absolute power of huge open fireplaces inside medieval castles. In movies, we're regularly shown stern lords standing by the fire with a heavy goblet of wine. It sounds logical and looks very atmospheric, but the laws of physics just laugh hysterically at this. But here's the thing. A fireplace was the most terrible and inefficient way to heat a large room.
A typical open hearth works like a giant vacuum cleaner that sucks all the air out of the room.
Essentially, you're trying to warm up while your own system is actively expelling precious heat outside. Let's break down this absurd situation in detail from the perspective of basic modern thermodynamics and logic. When firewood burns hot in the fireplace, the heated air rushes upward through the wide stone chimney. This physical movement creates powerful draft that begins aggressively sucking in cold air from the street through the cracks.
Your face is scorched by the fire, while your back is covered in a crust of ice.
You turn into a poor sausage on a spit that needs to be constantly turned for even cooking. It sounds like a very dubious and incredibly uncomfortable way to spend a long, dark winter evening. On top of that, these voracious monsters consumed an absolutely staggering amount of dry wood every single day. The castle required entire dense forests and a whole army of lumberjacks just to maintain the basic fire. Today's frightening utility bills seem like a pitiful trifle compared to the expenses back then. Trying to heat a stone hall covering hundreds of square meters with an open fire is clinical madness.
The heat simply vanished, without a trace, in the vast, empty space.
Not even reaching the far corners. That is why truly smart architects quickly realized the need to implement entirely different technological concepts. Huge fireplaces served more as an important status symbol than as a practical tool for survival. It was a visual way to show important guests their ability to literally burn money to ashes. Real, even heat was provided by hidden engineering systems, of which the simple, freezing peasants had no idea. But here it gets even more interesting, because many castles didn't have fireplaces in the main rooms at all. Designers deliberately avoided them so as not to severely compromise the overall airtightness of the building's stone shell. Every extra hole in the thick wall was viewed as a potentially fatal threat during winter storms. Imagine trying to heat your modern apartment in winter with the balcony wide open. The system of giant chimneys in the vast, drafty fortress halls worked with roughly the same absurd efficiency. That's why the brilliant engineers of the past began actively seeking ways to trap heat inside without a single crack. They turned their attention to the hidden properties of the most popular and cheapest building material. It turned out that ordinary stone could be more than just a cold and impenetrable element of military defense. With a competent scientific approach, it transformed into the most reliable and high-capacity heat storage system of the era. Modern researchers racked their brains for quite some time over the secret of how this incredible stone climate control system worked. But the answer was literally buried within the monstrous thickness of the fortress walls, which sometimes reached several meters.
The massive stone walls absorbed heat during the day and slowly released it at night.
You've surely noticed on tours how old, massive stone churches are always pleasantly cool in the summer. In winter, this same physical effect worked with absolute precision in the opposite direction, maintaining the internal temperature. The building functioned as a giant stationary battery that independently smoothed out any weather fluctuations outside. Modern construction companies use insanely expensive materials to achieve even a paltry fraction of this effect. But the rugged medieval craftsmen got this ideal climate control completely free of charge as a bonus to their defenses. Nature itself obediently did the bulk of the work for them in maintaining a comfortable living environment. But for this massive heating system to actually work, it was necessary to obsessively eliminate absolutely every possible draft. This is precisely why windows in real battle-ready castles were made tiny and placed extremely sparingly. Glass was astronomically expensive back then, so the openings were tightly sealed with thick shutters and oiled bull bladders. To modern people, this seems barbaric, but such insulation created an almost airtight environment inside the living quarters. The air was heated by people's breath and the occasional brazier, remaining trapped inside with no chance of escaping. As a result, even a tiny source of energy was enough to sustain life in a perfectly insulated stone sack. That is why the popular Hollywood image of huge, beautiful stained glass windows in living rooms is pure fiction. Builders obsessively studied seasonal wind patterns before even beginning to draw up plans for a new fortress. A deep understanding of the landscape completely replaced our modern, ultra-precise computer simulations of airflow dynamics. There was absolutely no room for error, for the cost of a mistake was measured in generations of an aristocratic family frozen to death. So the next time you see a fancy fireplace in a historical drama, just smile indulgently. Now you know for sure that it's just a beautiful, useless prop for creating television drama. The real engineering marvel lay silently hidden within the very monolithic walls that securely surrounded these cinematic heroes. The entire architecture of the building, from foundation to roof, was one giant and incredibly efficient climate control system. But thick walls alone were still not enough to survive the extremely harsh European winters. The aristocrats needed something much more complex and powerful, which we'll discuss in detail right now. Today, heated floors are considered a clear sign of an expensive designer renovation in a modern luxury city apartment. But get ready to be surprised because this innovative technology was widely used hundreds of years ago. Medieval architects simply ingeniously adapted an ancient Roman engineering system known as the Hipparcos to their needs. They fully understood the basic law of physics that heated air always rises. Therefore, heating the air somewhere off to the side or under a high ceiling seemed to them a completely irrational waste of resources. The solution was to turn the stone surface beneath your feet into a source of constant, even heat. Imagine a vast hidden network of brick tunnels right beneath the stone slabs of the main royal chambers. Somewhere deep in the damp basement, a gigantic central furnace, more like an industrial reactor, operated around the clock. Specially trained teams of servants continuously fed firewood into it, generating enormous volumes of scorching smoke and air. This scorching stream was directed not into a classic chimney, but into a tangled labyrinth of cavities beneath the floor. The superheated gas slowly crept beneath the entire floor area, heating the massive stone slabs to the perfect temperature. Thanks to this, your feet were always in blissful warmth, even in the most bitter January frost. This system solved the main fundamental problem of high stone halls, where ceilings often disappeared into the darkness. If you installed a conventional stove, all the warm air would immediately rise upward, leaving people below shivering. But when the entire vast floor is heated, the warmth is distributed as evenly as possible throughout the entire living space. The incredible scale of this hidden technology's application in the great Marienburg Castle of the Teutonic Knights is particularly striking. There, engineers managed to heat enormous dining halls capable of accommodating hundreds of heavily armed and hungry warriors at once. The floor in these halls was dotted with dozens of small special openings, covered by elegant decorative iron grills. When the nights felt chilly, the servants would simply open these vents slightly, letting in a blast of hot air from the basement. It worked exactly like the climate control vents in your modern, expensive German car. The knights simply adjusted the room temperature with a light movement of their foot without taking their eyes off the discussion of military strategies. But things get even more interesting when we look at the economics of this medieval engineering marvel. Unlike energy-hungry fireplaces, the hypocaust was an incredibly energy-efficient system thanks to the effect of thermal storage. The basement of Marienburg Castle was filled with huge piles of river stones, which were heated by a central underground fire. These stones absorbed a massive amount of energy and then slowly released it into the system over long periods of time. The furnace didn't need to be stoked constantly at full power. It was enough just to maintain the temperature of the stones. This saved an insane amount of wood and allowed the massive fortress to be maintained by just a couple of stokers. You're probably thinking that sleeping on such a smoky floor was dangerous due to the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. But these architects were far from fools and designed a safety system that met modern standards. The smoke channels were completely sealed off from the living quarters by a double layer of special fireproof mortar. Only clean, heated air entered the room, while the deadly smoke was vented through separate hidden shafts. This required incredible precision in bricklaying, as even the slightest crack could kill a sleeping aristocrat. The builders risked their own lives, so the quality of their work was truly masterful and timeless. Of course, such a luxurious option was available only to the wealthiest rulers and the most powerful military orders. Building a castle with an integrated hypocaust cost several times more than erecting ordinary solid walls. It required hiring rare specialists who knew the secrets of proper draft and the aerodynamics of enclosed underground stone spaces. It was the equivalent of buying your own nuclear submarine by today's crazy standards of financial inequality. But in return, the owner of such a system gained an incredible strategic advantage in the form of an absolutely healthy and vigorous army. While enemies were dying en masse from pneumonia and damp tents, his soldiers slept in tropical comfort. Unfortunately, after the fall of the Great Orders, this incredible engineering secret was long forgotten by the builders of Europe. For some reason, new generations of architects decided to return to beautiful but utterly useless, open-hearth decorative fireplaces. They sacrificed the logic of survival for the sake of the dubious visual aesthetics of a crackling fire in vast, grand palace halls. This led to a situation where, during the Renaissance, kings literally slept in fur coats because of the freezing cold. Technological regression sometimes takes the most absurd forms when people abandon genuinely functional systems for the sake of fashion. Old castles with hypocausts remain silent monuments to the true engineering ingenuity of their harsh and pragmatic creators. But warm floors were only part of the medieval person's overall defense strategy against the cold. Heat had to be not only generated and delivered to the room, but also retained there. Even the hottest floor won't help if the walls suck the energy out faster than you can warm up. And here, a completely unexpected tool entered the scene, one that today we associate only with boring museums. We're talking about an ordinary piece of fabric, which the engineers of the past transformed into the most advanced thermal insulation of their era. It sounds like the ramblings of a mad weaver, but now you'll see the genius of this unconventional solution. Today, tapestries seem to us like nothing more than boring museum art, intended solely for the mundane decoration of gray walls and to create an atmosphere of antiquity. You look at these faded, sometimes moth-eaten old pieces of fabric depicting hunting scenes or deer and have absolutely no idea of their true purpose. It sounds incredibly strange, but originally these were far from just pretty pictures from the pretentious and extravagant lives of wealthy aristocrats. In fact, what you see before you is a high-tech modular thermal insulation system that for centuries regularly saved hundreds of people from severe winter frostbite. The stone walls of castles, even though they served as excellent heat reservoirs when the sun was out, turned into blocks of ice during the winter, constantly radiating a light, piercing nighttime chill. And this is where a thick layer of heavy wool came to the rescue, covering literally the entire interior surface of the cold room. Just imagine for a moment that you're trying to spend the night in the middle of a harsh winter in a huge garage with bare concrete walls. Even if you placed a powerful electric heater right in the center, the concrete would aggressively and relentlessly suck all the heat out of your defenseless body. Medieval people understood this physical problem perfectly well and decided to literally dress their stone castles in huge warm winter sweaters. Tapestries were woven from extremely dense wool, and their thickness sometimes reached an impressive several centimeters of painstaking handiwork. They were never hung directly against the wall. They were secured at a small distance from the stonework, creating an ideal dead air gap inside. Modern engineers use this exact same basic principle when creating modern double-pane windows and thermoses, where air serves as the best insulator. The lords paid a fortune not for the beautiful figures of embroidered unicorns, but for square meters of high-quality, heat-insulating wool. It was the equivalent of buying rolls of mineral wool or foam insulation today, only with the added bonus of a chic designer look. The thicker, coarser, and heavier the tapestry, the higher its real contribution to the family's physical survival in the cold was valued. But here it gets more interesting, because fabric insulation wasn't limited to just the solid walls of the main reception halls. Castles were full of long, dark corridors where wild drafts constantly raged, capable of literally knocking a person off their feet with their force. To effectively block these deadly air currents, people used heavy, multi-layered drapes instead of ordinary wooden doors. Any wood tends to dry out over time and leave microscopic gaps, whereas heavy fabric fits perfectly around any opening, leaving no chance for the cold to escape. You literally had to push your way through several layers of thick wool to move from one living area of the fortress to another. These textile barriers reliably trapped heat within the living quarters, preventing it from escaping unchecked into empty, uninhabited corridors. Now think about the floors, which were far from always equipped with luxurious Roman underfloor heating systems. Walking on icy, frozen stone in winter was a surefire way to catch pneumonia and meet a sudden, senseless death from a cold. That's why the floors were covered with a thick layer of dry straw, reeds, and various fragrant dried meadow herbs for scent. To us, this sounds like terrible, unsanitary conditions, but in reality, it was a cheap and ingenious version of ancient carpet. A thick air cushion made of dry, hollow stalks brilliantly insulated people's feet from the frozen lower floors of the enormous building. Every few weeks, this ancient bio-carpet was simply swept out completely along with the dirt and replaced with a completely fresh and clean layer. Modern history buffs often laugh at old paintings where medieval kings wear ridiculous fur robes even indoors. But let's be honest, you'd put a whole bear on yourself too if you lived inside a huge stone box in January. Layered clothing in those days worked on the same principle as tapestries, creating a personal thermal capsule around the person. Using soft linen next to the skin and heavy coarse wool on the outside allowed the body to breathe freely and maintain its temperature for hours. This is essentially the concept of modern high-tech thermal clothing for professional mountaineers, only realized using readily available natural materials. They weren't silly fashionistas. They were hardy pragmatists who simply wanted to survive until the next long-awaited spring. The incredible portability of this textile climate system is striking. It could be easily disassembled and transported to another location. When an important aristocrat moved to another of his castles, he literally took his accumulated warmth with him on the journey. Huge caravans were loaded with hundreds of rolled-up heavy tapestries, which the servants would hang up as quickly as possible in the new damp location. Arrive at an icy, empty fortress, quickly drape the walls with wool, And there you are, back in relative comfort. This ancient flexibility of mind commands genuine respect from today's practical experts in logistics and self-sufficiency. Fabric gave people a freedom of movement that no stationary hearth or stove could provide. Of course, the production of such colossal and consistent volumes of fabric required the development of an entire massive industry across the whole of Europe. Hundreds of thousands of sheep were sheared continuously to supply high-quality material to the endless looms in dozens of major industrial cities. Entire guilds of craftsmen worked for decades solely to ensure that the lord's castles did not freeze through every harsh winter. The economies of entire nations ultimately revolved around the creation of this primitive, yet vitally necessary thermal insulation: hairy wallpaper. This is an excellent example of how a basic physiological need for simple warmth can become a powerful engine of economic progress. The fight against the cold created more jobs and technologies in Europe than many of the great wars of that brutal and harsh era. But even a huge room carefully wrapped in expensive wool was still too large a space for comfortable sleep. When a person sleeps, their internal metabolism slows down significantly, and they become extremely vulnerable to the treacherous nighttime cold. Heating the entire gigantic volume of the hall for the sake of a single sleeping lord was absolutely uneconomical, even with the thickest tapestries. It was necessary to radically reduce the total volume of the heated space to the dimensions of the specific resting human body. And so, a stroke of medieval engineering genius gave rise to a unique object that we today consider merely a ridiculous relic of the past. They invented a survival capsule, artfully disguised as an ordinary item of expensive palace decor. A modern plush bedroom seems to us like the unattainable pinnacle of comfort and coziness after a long, hard day's work. But the austere medieval engineers would look at your open, wide bed with complete professional bewilderment and even alarm. For them, sleeping carelessly in the middle of a large empty room in winter was tantamount to foolish suicide by gradual hypothermia. So they decided to radically change the architectural approach itself and turn the bed into a completely separate, almost airtight survival capsule. The famous four-poster bed was not a silly sign of royal ostentation or whim, but a tool of brutal and pragmatic life-saving. It was a true micro-home that carpenters and weavers built specifically to preserve every precious degree of heat for as long as possible. Just consider the ingenious scale of this utilitarian approach to the mundane process of a simple nightly rest. When a lord climbed into bed and tightly drew the heavy velvet curtains, he effectively cut himself off from the cold outside world. Inside this small enclosed cube, measuring just a couple of cubic meters, a completely unique tropical nighttime microclimate was created. The heat of the human body no longer dissipated uselessly into the high, dark ceiling of the room, but was reflected back toward the sleeper by the thick fabric of the canopy. Just 20 minutes after the curtains were drawn, the temperature inside this capsule became quite comfortable for peaceful and healthy sleep. You literally turned yourself into a powerful, compact battery that heated your own microscopic woolen bedroom. But the design of this wooden and fabric sleeping vessel had been thought out down to the most minute and precise technical details. The bed structure itself was deliberately raised high above the icy stone floor on massive carved wooden legs. This completely eliminated any physical contact with the coldest lower air currents, which always pool at the bottom of any room. Beneath the thick mattress lay a complex system of tightly stretched ropes in a thick layer of straw insulation for softness and warmth. A person slept as if floating in the air, reliably protected from the cold on all 6 possible sides of their body. Modern tourists often think that high beds were made solely for grandeur, although it was pure and life-saving aerodynamics. Now let's take a closer look at what exactly these resourceful, cunning, and highly resilient people slept on. The main secret weapon against nighttime frost was an incredibly thick down comforter, stuffed with top-quality goose down. It was the ancient equivalent of a modern high-tech sleeping bag for extreme high-altitude Himalayan expeditions, only of an incredibly gigantic size. A person would literally sink into this enormous cloud of insulating material, which prevented heat from escaping downward or sideways through any gaps. On top of that, they were covered with several more layers of heavy woolen blankets and natural furs from wild and domestic animals for added reliability. In such multi-layered down and fur armor, it was physically impossible to freeze, even at sub-zero temperatures in the castle's main hall. But things get even more interesting when we learn about additional portable means of local nighttime bed heating. Special ceramic or metal vessels filled with hot coals or boiling water were often brought into this enclosed tent of a bed. This ancient hot water bottle was carefully placed at the foot of the bed an hour before the lord of the castle was about to retire after a feast. It functioned like a local nuclear reactor, preheating the entire enclosed volume of air beneath the thick canopy blankets. By the time he went to sleep, the lord did not dive into an icy bed, but into a carefully prepared warm bath of air. This sounds like the ideal modern service, which is available to people today only in the form of expensive electric blankets that are sometimes a fire hazard. Interestingly, this capsule survival system was available not only to kings, but also to ordinary wealthy townspeople in their homes. Even in simple peasant dwellings across Europe, people built special cupboard beds built directly into the thickness of a wooden wall or piece of furniture. These were literally wooden boxes with small doors, into which a person would climb for the entire night and seal themselves inside completely. You've surely noticed that even today, in very cold apartments, you instinctively want to pull a blanket over your head. We unconsciously try to recreate that very ancient microcapsule, which our ancestors perfected to absolute technical excellence. They transformed this animal instinct for heat conservation into an elegant and expensive work of architectural and textile art. And when you see a canopy in a museum, don't think of silly princesses on a pea from old children's fairy tales. Think of the rugged men in armor who ingeniously figured out how to hack the laws of nature using a piece of fabric and wood. They created a portable personal summer for themselves in the midst of the endless, icy European winter, using only their powerful intellect and the experience of generations. But no matter how well insulated the bed was, people still had to go out into the great halls during the day to conduct business and socialize. Heating the castle's vast spaces with just their breath and thick carpets was, after all, absolutely impossible due to the colossal physical volumes involved. The engineers of the past needed a powerful, constant, and completely free source of massive thermal radiation to maintain the temperature. And they found this source in a place where a modern, clean living person would never even think to look for it in their home. They turned to those who generated heat around the clock without demanding a lumberjack's wage or firewood in return. We are talking about the widespread use of biological machines, which we today mistakenly consider to be nothing more than amusing household pets. Today, we are accustomed to fastidiously separating animal habitats from our own sterile, clean city apartments. The idea of placing a herd of smelly cows right beneath our own cozy bedroom seems utterly wild to us. But medieval architects were guided by the logic of brutal survival, not by our modern standards of odor and sanitation. They understood perfectly well that every large, warm-blooded animal is, in fact, a living, round-the-clock heater of enormous power. And it would have been the height of foolishness and wastefulness to let this free energy simply vanish into the frosty air. That is why animals became a crucial engineering element of the highly complex passive climate control system in massive stone fortresses and peasant homes. Just consider this amazing biological fact, which is rarely mentioned in boring medieval history textbooks. An average adult horse at rest emits roughly as much heat as a high-quality modern electric oil-filled radiator. Now imagine the ground floor of a castle where dozens of these powerful living muscle generators stand in the stables. All this massive mass of warm, humid air, obeying the laws of inexorable physics, slowly but surely rose upward. It naturally warmed the stone ceilings of the stables, which simultaneously served as the floors for the living quarters on the second level. The lords literally walked on a floor that was carefully warmed from below by the heat of the breath and bodies of their war horses. It was an absolutely ingenious system of dual use of valuable resources, the kind that modern, eco-conscious urban planners dream of today. Horses and cows had to be fed anyway, and reliably sheltered from the cold and enemy raids. So why not make them provide an additional passive benefit in the form of the continuous production of massive amounts of heat? The architects deliberately designed the buildings so that the living quarters were always located directly above the largest livestock pens. They intentionally left small, concealed ventilation openings in the ceilings to facilitate the flow of warm air to the freezing people. Essentially, the entire first level of the fortress functioned as one colossal biochemical furnace that required no firewood. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? After all, the smell from such close quarters must have been simply unbearable. But here lies another challenge to our modern, delicate expectations regarding the cleanliness of the environment in those harsh times. For a medieval person, the smell of manure was not a cause for disgust or frantic calls to the health inspection service. It was the enduring scent of wealth, reliability, food security, and, most importantly, the scent of long-awaited warm, life-saving air. When it's -20 outside, you'd gladly trade the scent of fresh roses for the warmth of a cow's breath. Moreover, the floors were covered with a thick layer of aromatic herbs, which partially masked the sharpest notes of the animal scent. This survival strategy was actively employed not only in massive, aristocratic castles, but also in ordinary farmhouses. The famous longhouses, widespread throughout Northern Europe, were built according to exactly the same brutally pragmatic physical principle. People and animals spent the winter under one long roof, separated only by a thin partition or simply a symbolic visual line. The heat from a dozen cows and sheep kept the peasant family from freezing to death during endless snowstorms. In modern economics, this is called brilliant synergy, when two different elements of a system help each other survive. People protected the livestock from predators, and the livestock saved people from the icy breath of the merciless northern winter. The most striking thing is that this biological heating system was fully automated by nature itself, without sensors or wires. You didn't have to wake up at night to throw wood on the cow. She generated heat entirely on her own. As long as the animal was well-fed and alive, it faithfully performed its function as a powerful radiator on the ground floor. Modern smart home systems, costing tens of thousands of dollars, pale in comparison to this ancient reliability of the basic laws of biology. The fireplace might break down, the chimney might collapse, but the herd of cows kept providing heat no matter what. This was the foundation of thermal security upon which the rest of the complex life of a vast, harsh medieval community was built. Sometimes this symbiotic use of heat led to domestic situations that seem utterly bizarre from a modern perspective. Some castle owners specifically kept small dogs so they could sleep in the same bed as their masters. These warm, fluffy bundles served as portable living hot water bottles, crawling under the cold blanket on freezing nights. It sounds funny, but it was an officially recognized medical method for combating hypothermia and joint pain among the aristocracy. Today, we buy expensive dogs for status, but they use them as mobile fur-covered heat support stations. The pragmatism of these people knew no bounds when it came to preserving their own health in a cold climate. Ultimately, when you appreciate the engineering genius of castle builders, you must take this entire massive biological factor into account. A building was never just a lifeless pile of stones. It was a huge, living, breathing, multi-tiered, complex organism. The lower floors generated heat through muscle mass, while the middle floors stored it using thick stone walls. The upper tiers retained the remaining energy with thick tapestries and ingenious wooden beds shaped like sealed, airtight cabinets. It was a perfect closed ecosystem that functioned brilliantly for millennia before the first coal or gas power plant appeared. They turned life itself into a reliable source of energy, and this deserves the deepest engineering respect from their descendants. We have just taken apart, piece by piece, one of the most grandiose illusions imposed on us by modern mainstream cinema. You saw with your own eyes that survival in an icy medieval castle did not depend on silly, roaring decorative fireplaces. It depended on humanity's ingenious ability to understand the nature of things and turn its most complex laws to its advantage. Stone, fabric, smoke, animals, and even the very structure of the bed. All of this was part of a single intellectual machine. These people were not primitive savages. They were outstanding practical engineers with incredibly sharp minds and logic. And their solutions still amaze us with their elegance and absolute, almost ruthless functional efficiency. Now just think about how dependent we become on our fragile technological crutches. If you cut off the power in a modern smart home in the middle of winter, it will freeze solid in just a couple of miserable days. Our floor-to-ceiling glass windows are beautiful, but they are utterly helpless in the face of a truly raging natural force. A medieval castle, designed by skilled craftsmen, could sustain an entire garrison autonomously through the long, harsh winter months. Their technologies did not require software updates. They required only strict adherence to the laws of aerodynamics and basic thermodynamics. This forces us to take a completely fresh look at what we today arrogantly call humanity's technical progress. It is amusing to observe how cutting-edge, modern, eco-friendly architecture today attempts to rediscover these long-forgotten ancient principles. We proudly speak of the concept of the passive house, which uses thick walls in the sun for natural free heating. We call this 21st century innovation, requesting millions of dollars in grants and investments for such projects. And the stern Teutonic knights and nameless fortress builders are simply laughing at us from the depths of centuries past. They successfully applied all these innovations 1,000 years ago, using only rough hands, calluses, and sharp wits. Sometimes to take a step forward into the future, we need to look very closely at the solutions of our distant past. I hope that after this journey into history, you'll never be able to watch historical films with the same naivety again. When a movie hero grandly warms his hands by a massive open fireplace in a gigantic, empty, echoing hall, you'll know that in reality, his back is freezing and he's dreaming of crawling into his box bed. You'll know about the hot stones of the Hippocaust hidden deep in the basement and about the cows on the first level. You'll become the keeper of secret knowledge about how the great mechanics of survival actually worked in those incredibly complex eras. And this knowledge is far cooler and more fascinating than any made-up Hollywood fairy tale about noble but perpetually freezing knights. This whole story perfectly illustrates one simple yet incredibly powerful idea about human nature and our intelligence. We will always find a way to adapt and survive, even if we find ourselves locked in a giant, cold stone labyrinth in winter. The lack of modern technology doesn't make people of the past any less intelligent. It simply forces their brains to think outside the box and creatively. They compensated for the lack of energy with incredible ingenuity, making the entire surrounding world work obediently for their own well-being. And this is the legacy we should truly be proud of as we study the history of our great, indomitable, and resilient ancestors. With that, we conclude our deep dive into the secrets of medieval engineering solutions for survival in harsh climates. You've learned how fabric, stone, and biology combine to create invincible armor against the fiercest and most merciless cold. If you enjoy such intellectual explorations and want to learn more about the hidden, forgotten mechanisms of ancient history, then keep asking the right questions and never believe the simple, pretty images from mainstream blockbusters. Real history is always more complex, more paradoxical, and 100 times more interesting than even the most expensive computer graphics of today. There are still many great mysteries ahead, just waiting for us to examine them in detail.